Jaya. I'm a mother and a writer, and I write fiction, which means I live more in my head than on earth. Earth, which has my house, my two kids, it has my cooking lady, the dhobi, the iron wala, each of who have come to earth to ring the doorbell 50 times a day, because I'm not supposed to live in my head. I am supposed to be, I have duties, I have responsibilities, I'm a mom, right? So, well, as statistics go, being a woman writer doesn't bode that well. Many women fiction writers, some my idols, died alone, friendless, with cats for company. So friendless because they were rude, they were erratic, they were unpredictable. Menless because they created such phenomenal men in their heads that the real ones ran away. Possibly if they had kids, even the kids would run away. So net, it is round about this time that I should be actually thinking about changing my job, because I don't even like cats, okay, honestly. So apart from dead women, I also like dead ancient male writers very much. I've written a book recently on one of them. His name is Vatsayana. He's about 2000 years old and really ancient and really dead. So this book it's a story of his life, his times, and the world that he lived in, you know. And my publisher called me recently and he said, Jaya, your book's a bestseller. And I was like, wow, good times and stuff like that. More about that a little later. So apart from being a debut novelist, I write everything, okay? I write web shows, I write TV stories, I write wicked articles under a pseudonym for a digital magazine. And there was a time when I've written for 3,000 rupees wedding cards. I also write for my friends breakup texts, makeup sex, you know. So, because you know, which writer has once not been a poor writer? So today I'm going to talk to you about being a writer who straddles different kind of writing universes, you know, because one thing is where we write to be, get our creativity out, and the other thing is make money, okay? So if you really want to be at peace with writing and make money, you have to ride many horses and not lose your mind in the process, okay? So as far as I'm concerned, I've been writing since I was 7. I remember when I was a kid, I'd cut out pages from my math book, I had stitched it together, and I'd made this little book in which I'd written this mystery story called Gopalpur by the Sea. Then I was like very proud of it, and I proceeded to hide it from everyone, because I've always been really uncertain about my writing. Even today, I write for so many platforms. When I walk into a room, like I'm writing for the biggest storyteller in India today, which is Ekta Kapoor. I mean, she produces 70 hours of programming, I think, daily, literally. I walk into a meeting room with her, and at the moment, I've done like 5 shows in the last 1 year with her. 2 are under production, 1 is under development, 2 are like raging hits on the internet. I walk into a meeting and I am nervous, I'm uncertain, and I am so like self-deprecating. But the thing is, the times are good for writers right now, so even if we think badly, that we write badly, we are getting work right now. My interest with writing actually began with reading. By the time I was 13 years old, I had read everything in my dad's library, from like Kafka, Proust. I had read autobiographies, I had read Harold Robbins, I had read pornographic anthologies, you know. And see, this was back in the 70s and 80s. We did not have internet, what we had was time. You know, the broadcasters, international broadcasters, they hadn't come in, we didn't have like this information barraging us at all from all screens. So, storytelling was really pure, and I remember like my grandmom, we used to sit around her, there would be load shedding, and she'd tell us these beautiful, stories, Nimbu Rajkumar, the thugs of the jungles of Trikhand, and of course classics like Rama and Mahabharat. And my hand would always go up because my feminist genes had begun to kick in like really fast. And I was like, but why did Ram believe the dhobi and not his wife? And so why did Kunti not take back her words when she turned around, when she said that share whatever you got amongst the 5 of you, when she turned around and saw that what they got was a girl, why didn't she take her words back? And then of course there was that Shravan Kumar story, that beautiful boy, that brave fellow who carried his blind aging parents on his shoulders. That is one story that I have milked with my kids, you know, honestly, unko suna kar. So I wasn't born as Vatsayan's doppelganger amidst sheaves of ancient texts. I was, I come from a very respectable middle-class family. We were 6 siblings, like puppies we were brought up, and we were told, you must follow your dreams. But the one big dream that we needed to follow was get married. Because shaadi kar lo, sab kuch sahi ho jayega. Because in Indian families, as I'm sure all of you must be hearing this already, everything is fixed by marriage, like most magically, you know. It's settle ho jayegi. Settle mane kya matlab? Most of the people don't realize that most problems actually start after marriage. But that I think is a material for 36 minutes. These people are going to throw me out. So my mom, she has always supported me, and she's always been that biggest critic, okay? So now my book was coming out, and it's filled with a lot of, how shall I put it, sex, okay? So she was like, ha beta, kitab nikal rahi hai and all. She was there for the launch, and you know, I signed a copy for her and stuff like that. And then I gave her the book, and she went off to Calcutta, and I'm waiting with bated breath for her to call me and like blow me up. And I was really surprised because she called me and she said she really loved the book, and she caught on to the philosophical, spiritual thread which I've tried to tie in the love story. And what I realized was that the stories that you tell from your soul always reach the reader regardless of age, right? Because the other person who I feared was a good 50 years younger than my mom, who's my son. He's 20, okay? And I was like really scared because Kama is an extremely erotic novel. It has explicit, amorous, copulatory descriptions, aka vividly sexy sex alert. So I was like, what is he going to think? The kids have grown up with the Kama Sutra, copies of Kama Sutra floating all over the house. But anyway, I made him swear. I said, Kabir, till you're 42 or till I'm dead, you will not read this book. But of course, children don't listen. He'd read the book. He called me from college and he said, Ma, wow, mom, great fab book and really nice and all that, and damn cool, and you write well. And by the way, I'm getting a lot of attention from chicks because they think you're cool, so I'm also cool. So, well, as long as I've given fodder to my mom's satsang group and aided my son in his love life, my journey on earth is done, I suppose. So now, how does a girl from a middle class family, patriarchal traditional setup where they, you know, sort of tell us to do like traditional jobs. Beta, doctor bano, engineer bano, acha journalism karna hai, acha wo dangerous wala mat karna. You know, how does a girl who comes out of that kind of a setup decide to become a writer, and that too research ancient erotica? So I have realized something at this late old age of life, that everything that you do in life is leading you to the place you are in today. You just have to remove the riffraff and join the dots. So if I go with my dots, when I was a teen, like I told you, I read a lot, but I read a lot of feminist writing. In my 20s, I was reading a lot of erotica. Of course, I did cricket, I did fashion, I was shooting all over the place, I was doing electronic journalism, but I also shot 3 movies, 3 documentaries on sex workers. I was, beginning to get obsessed with grand stories. By the time I reached my 30s, I had started writing. I was trying to write big stories. I was trying to write about real people, but also imagined lands, right? So, I wanted to be a writer from the age of 7. I wanted to be an author, and it took me 40 years. So I had to unlearn everything. For 40 years, I learned how not to stifle my voice. So that was one of my major learnings. And I feel that stories that you say from the soul can be catalysts for the readers to and trigger them onto a deeply personal journey. I'll tell you something. The first time I read Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, I was 20-something, and I was so moved by that one story, a novella, that I wrote a letter to myself behind that book. And it was a letter that said that if I ever find myself in that unhappy place, I would change my life moment by moment. 13 years later, while I was moving around, cartons of books were being unpacked, I found this book, I read this letter, and I decided at that moment to keep that promise to Virginia. Now, her words they were reflecting, reaching out to me as I kept getting socked in the gut by the invisible words between her published words, right? So similarly, Anna Nin's works, her radical free thought on love, sex, polyamory, with a, sensual boldness that she wrote with, made me feel guilt-free about my thoughts, my candor about desire, and I realized that is the power of the written word. And with that power comes a lot of responsibility. This responsibility I had absolutely no clue about. I was oblivious to when I began writing the story, which I had no clue would land up becoming this explosive sex novel, okay? Had I even a clue of things to come, I would have probably stopped writing. Now, again, in my journey of life, I realized that's another dot. Ignorance is bloody bliss, because what you don't fear, you continue in that path. Otherwise, I would have never written it. Another big driving factor at that moment was I was fed up of writing the kind of stuff that I was writing at that time, which was basically for TV. So today for writers, the digital medium is fantastic. You can say, if you have a great story to tell, there's enough and more people who are going to fund it to put it up, right? TV gave us a lot of constant work, it gave us a lot of money, but it also gave us these rigid, structure to work in, and it gave us censorship. So, any of you ever watched a Saas Bahu serial drama or followed it? Raise your hands, don't be shy of your parents. You over here. So there is a secret template, okay, in every channel when you enter for a writer's meeting, which says, you have this slide? In the war between Bechari Ladki and Badchalan Ladki, Jeet will always be of Bechari Ladki, who will always eventually fix her evil in-laws. It becomes Super Bahu. So one thing all the channel folks ask you is, ladki ka pain kya hai? Okay? Because all bechari ladkis have a lot of pain. And at that point, I was sick of writing about the pain. I was sick of, I wanted to write about unabashed love. I wanted to write about, uncontrolled passion, real life stories, where a married couple doesn't take 200 episodes not to copulate, where the entire show is not spent making sure that the main protagonists don't get any, okay? So I was so fed up, so frustrated, I had slyly started writing this article in, I was bashing screenwriting for television. And I thought that's my truth, but the truth also has many versions. What I thought was, so many billion people view that stuff and they like it and they pay for it. So the book for me actually started in this melting pot, this whole meltdown that I was having. And it was a simple question that I asked, that why was Kama Sutra written? At a day and age when it was India, the land of Vedas, Dharma, okay, why would a man spend his entire life chronicling something which we now see as like a carnal catalogue? So my friend Harsh Vardhan Kadam, who's an artist, and I were basically going through the latest version, a coffee table book, very expensive, of Kama Sutra. And he was dissing the art, and he was saying, kya art banaya hai, Jaipuri miniatures. And I was looking at the writing and saying, kya pedantic, 4 baje mor nach raha hai, usko dekho, 5 baje gud khao. That's the kind of description of Kama Sutra that they had translated. So he looked at me and he said, haven't you ever wondered who this guy was? I was like, yeah, who was Vatsayana? He said, why don't you research? Why don't you write a story on him? I said, okay, because I wanted to sound very cool at that moment to, in front of him. But what I didn't realize was that this was a seed in my head, and I started writing notes, and the notes became a pile of paper. And then it was 2011, and I began the book in fragments, and suddenly there was this ancient Indian man who was just taking over my entire dreamscape. I was getting obsessed, to write about him. So Kama Sutra might be one of the most Googled words today. Okay, it's the most downloaded ebook, most pirated ebook, yet nothing is known about Vatsayana. Who was he? Why did he write this book? What motivated him? When did he live? Everything is shrouded under mystery. So for a writer like me with a rampant imagination, this left the canvas like entirely open. So I realized that in the early days when I was reading a whole bunch of Kama Sutras, I realized that in all the versions, that while this looks like a thing for the man about town, like a handbook for the debonair man, it's actually essentially only about wooing and pleasing women. All the chapters are about that. All the chapters are not about sex. It talks a lot about philosophy and science also. So it seemed to me suddenly that Vatsayan seemed like the very first feminist ancient Indian man who actually thought about women in days and age, so that really struck me, and I began writing a story which was more about love than sex. So it was about a man who was so forsaken in love that he wrote the biggest book of sex about it. Now, in between my TV writing, I would head out to Varanasi to research. I would spend a lot of time in the libraries. I was arguing with a whole bunch of professors. I went to Khajuraho. I did a lot of things that I could see ancient Banaras falling into place. And I wanted to get the background correct, and I wanted to base it about 100 years before the golden age of the Gupta period came along, right? I thought at those times the kings would have been smaller, they would have been land grabbing, they would have been more debauched, those were darker times. What I realized also is that creative writing and solid research, gives you a nice background for a good storytelling. And by now I was straddling two worlds. So by night I was writing about feminism and sexuality, about mythical creatures, about tantra, about sexual positions and emotional repercussions. And by day, I was walking to channel meetings and fighting with the producers over the next scheming saas saga. Plot kya hoga? Dahi kisne jamaya? Mata ki chauki mein kaun nahi aaya? But it wasn't hurting so much now because my love was going into the book entirely. I was learning how to compartmentalize and balance, because what feeds your stomach and what feeds your soul, according to me, are two different things. It was a very satiating experience to balance both at that time. Also, one thing I was beginning to worry about now the book was almost complete was I like, oh my God, what would the reaction be? People would say, oh, Jaya has written her debut novel as a sex book. And I thought about it and I realized something, that in the 21st century, as a writer, I'm writing about eroticism, I'm writing about gender politics, I'm talking about emotions. That itself is a hugely liberating experience. I mean, 100 years ago, I would have been sitting in front of a chula saying, ugly roti, So it was like, it's great. But as a woman in 2019 India, it's taken me 40 years to free my mind from the trappings of predetermined societal conditions. I feel women tend to live their lives in duality. What we truly are, mostly in our heads. We play what the society thinks about us as daughters, as mothers, as wives, as girlfriends. And I feel strongly that the world's perception of who you are and your perception of yourself has to be in sync. And as soon as this thought had hit me, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be exactly who I am and say exactly what I want, regardless of what the world thinks of me. The world could be my children or my mother or anybody around me. So I wrote Kama quite unlike any other creative work that I've done so far. It was like I was in a waiting room at a train station, and each idea was a train that I was waiting for it to arrive. And I took 5 years because I only wrote when the story downloaded from some magical tunnel right into my laptop. And there was one time when I had a serious personal crisis and I did not write a word for 6 months. And for 6 months, Vatsayan was exactly in the place where I had left him in my story, which was in a jungle, absolutely drugged on opium, hallucinating about his love, betrayed and grieved. I left him there and he stood there waiting for me to get out of my dark phase so I could delve into his. So I feel I followed a rather impossible dream, which my dream was impossible for me. I just wrote with my heart. And somehow it all makes sense now, because I love the letters I get from the readers. Every day I wake up to so many letters, and the book affects them. They write dialogues on, you know, the kind of things they're feeling at that moment. It's getting made into a big international series. I'm writing my next book because people want to read what I write next. And at the same time, I'm enjoying my regular work. That process continues. I'm telling contemporary stories for the visual medium. But my soul, the stories that actually need to be told freely, those are the ones that make life really worth living, and that for me is pure art. So I want to, in conclusion, I want to just read out something which I had written for you. In conclusion, I feel, while you may have careers that pay you really, really well, don't forget to find a creative vent for your soul and ride that horse as well. What is life if one insulates oneself from feeling art or from creating it? You know, I honestly feel each of us is an artist. All you need is a muse. Sometimes the muse could jolly well be yourself, sometimes a place, a thing, you know, you just have to find that. And sometimes you actually write because you create because you're driven by a desire to just sort of break the stagnancy of your world, you know. So people write, create art and make films and make music, not so much for others. They do it so that to push the sluggish blood in their lazy veins. So I want to leave you with this, that disrupt yourself, tear your minds, wreak havoc within, and then let it flow. Those words that paint, those words of music. See, the recipe of madness is the same everywhere. Few ounces of blood, a glass full of love, a mountain of pain, and a heart caged within the ribs like a wounded flapping bird. Now go create. Thank you for listening to me.